welcome to talk number 4. So today we're diving into leaky gut, digestion, the microbiome, and all how this relates to autoimmune conditions. Today you'll probably learn more about the digestive system maybe than you already have heard in your entire life. But I wanted to go into the digestive system in particular, because I think we always talk about the gut, but we don't really talk about digestion. And I think digestion is just as important, or even not more important than the gut, because that's where you can take action steps to improve it. So when we go through today's presentation, I'd really encourage you to just think about what you experience in your body and pay particular attention to those bits, because then you're going to get some good action steps to take into your life to hopefully help make a difference and continue your journey with nutrition and gut health. So again, just a disclaimer, this is a presentation with nutrition and lifestyle advice only. I don't diagnose, prevent, or treat diseases or other medical conditions. So please consult your doctor for advice about specific ailments, and also before really taking any drastic changes to your diet or doing anything in particular. And we always respect bioindividuality. I've mentioned this a lot. So all nutrition recommendations are different. So everyone who has got a certain autoimmune condition could have it for a very different reason, or there could be very different underlying factors. So please remember that when implementing things, and just because it works for someone else, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you. As I said, this is talk number 4 out of 5. And so the last one in a couple of weeks will all be about the environment around you and how to reduce your toxic load. This will be a bit lighter in content, so please bring any questions that you have from the last 4 talks to this. Please, if you have them in advance, please send them through to Charmaine, who can then send them through to me, and then we can have a bit of time in this call doing a Q&A as well, and that's in 2 weeks. So just a reminder, all of the work that I do as a functional nutritionist is really about trying to get to the root cause of your symptoms. So we have the conditions that present themselves on the surface as the things that manifest, the things that we get diagnosed with by the doctor. But actually, what is the underlying mechanisms that are driving this? This can be things like genetics, which we have limited control over, but then we do have control over the diet that we eat, our digestion, our exposure to toxic chemicals, and managing our stress. Obviously, that's easier said than done. Some things are easier to work with than others, but still being really mindful of these things can really help understand what's really driving, what's the primary drivers of your condition right now. So friendly signs that your gut health can do with some work. So we have on the left-hand side, the kind of the more symptoms that are directly related to the digestive system. So bloating, constipation, diarrhea, heartburn, reflux, burping, feeling full in the morning. So these are signs that are directly related to your gut that indicate that you can do some work. Or we have the things that are not really related to, that you don't necessarily think are related to your gut or digestive system, that means that your gut could do with some work. So anemia, joint pain, fatigue, brain fog, anxiety, eczema, an autoimmune condition, dark circles under your eyes, difficulty losing weight, chipped fingernails are just a few of those. And just for me personally, so it's over 10 years now since I changed my diet, and the first 2 steps that I took were taking gluten out and drinking chicken broth. And I never thought I had a digestive issue. I didn't go to anyone going, my digestion is not working properly. I was at an osteopath, and I thought my digestion was fine. I thought the foods I was eating was fine. And it wasn't until I actually made those 2 changes that then I had inflammation fall off around my face, on my tummy, and my ankylosing spondylitis started to improve. If it had been up for me to make digestive changes, I would never have done it, because I didn't realize I had anything to work on. So for those of you that don't think they have any digestive symptoms and you don't have anything wrong with your digestive system, I would also challenge you to go, can I change things up and give other things a go and see what happens? So our digestive system is, as Hippocrates said, all disease begins in the gut. It is essential. So it is our digesting organ. It ingests foods. We secrete gastric juices to break down foods. We propel through foods through our digestive system. We absorb nutrient and we excrete leftovers. It is an immune organ. So our immune system is protecting us against invaders and pathogens. And a big part of our digestive system is to stop invading pathogens coming in from our environment, so the food that we eat. And as a result of that, because our digestive system is such a big organ, as in the lining of our small intestine is ginormous, it takes up tennis courts room of space, 70 to 80% of the immune system sits in our gut. In an autoimmune disease, we have immune dysregulation. So we want to make sure that we're tending to our gut to make sure this part of our immune system is working properly so it can put energy in the other part of the immune system that we need to help rebalance our immune system. Our gut is a detoxification organ. We eliminate fat-soluble toxins through this and hormones like estrogen from our body. And say, for example, if you suffer with constipation, the slow-moving movement through your large intestine is going to cause toxins and hormones like estrogen to be reabsorbed back into the body. It's part of our nervous system. So the enteric nervous system sits in the gut wall. So this is a part of the nervous system that is dedicated to the gut. This is intimately connected to the brain and the nervous system through the vagus nerve, and it affects our mood and more. It also affects brain health. So not only is we have a nervous system in our gut that's connected to the brain, but we also have the gut is where many neurotransmitters are made. If we don't get a good diet, we can't make neurotransmitters. If we don't absorb food, we can't get the neurotransmitters in. If our gut's not working properly, we can't make things like serotonin. And then also the brain lining is reported to be very similar to the gut lining. So people say if you have a quote unquote leaky gut, you'll often have a leaky brain. So if you have a leaky brain, for example, you'll have things in your brain that are not supposed to be there, which then drives symptoms. And 40% of your body's energy is used to support digestive system function, which I think is quite phenomenal and makes you realize how important it is. So dysfunction in the digestive system is obviously the opposite of what we just shared in the slide above, but just to point out a few things. So if digestion is not working, we can't absorb the foods from the foods that we're eating. So even if you eat the most nutrient-dense diet, if your digestive system is not working, you're not going to get the benefits of that. So I changed my diet, and my diet was pretty damn good for a number of years, but then suddenly the changes that I made weren't really working anymore. And then we realized we had to work on my digestion. So the stage 2, I like to say in my healing journey, is working on my inner health. So working on my gut health, making sure I didn't have things in there that shouldn't be. And that made huge changes to my health once again. Because the immune system is in our gut, or so much of the immune system is in our gut, digestive dysfunction drives inflammation and has a diverse range of impacts on our entire body. Food intolerances can actually arise due to digestive dysfunction rather than the food themselves. So people can become intolerant to things like garlic, onion, broccoli, anything really. And this is not, the food itself is not inherently in quote unquote bad. It's actually very nutrient dense, but our digestive system's not working enough. So when we actually eat it, we end up with digestive symptoms. There's a study that's being completed where they looked at everyone with an autoimmune condition. They had a study of people with autoimmune conditions, and everyone that they studied, they actually realized they all had a leaky gut, which I think is very profound. And then there's so much more. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And once again, just because you don't feel that you have digestive issues doesn't mean that there are not things to work on. So going back to this triad of autoimmune conditions, the 3 driving factors, which is being developed by Alessio Fasano, which we've touched upon a number of times in this. And it's a 3-legged stool analogy. So what he says is that there are kind of 3 things you need to set yourself up for an autoimmune condition. So the first of which is genetic susceptibility. The second of which is increased intestinal permeability, which then obviously would then put pressure on your immune system. And then the third is then a trigger that then triggers that autoimmune condition. So I just wanted to bring it back to that to make sure everyone realizes how important addressing your gut health is with an autoimmune condition. And that's obviously around the onset, but I think it's also really relevant around flares and things about trying to keep your autoimmune condition under control for a long period of time. I think your gut health is really, really, really crucial. So digestion. Digestion is fundamental. So this is a process of your food moving through your digestive tract and you digesting it. And a reminder that every cell in your body, nutrition makes up every cell, that makes up every tissue, that makes up every organ, all depends on the the nutrition that we take in. And so if we don't put good food in, we are not going to get good food in our body. And this also relies on making sure we digest our food. A healthy digestion is key to a healthy immunity. So to improve immune function, we really want to strengthen the defenses, so strengthen our digestive system, and we want to remove the stressors that are going to stress out our immune system. So stress in itself, nutrient, we want to make sure we're reducing processed foods and much more. So if you don't remember anything else in this talk, apart from maybe this principle, I'd be really happy. So the principle is digestion is a north to south process. And so what I mean by that is that digestion, I imagine if I asked everyone here, where does digestion start? If you hadn't heard me speak before, you might say the mouth. But digestion actually starts in the brain. And so what I mean by that is that if we don't get the conditions right in our brain, it's going to affect what happens further down in our digestive system. And so, for example, say you get bloating or constipation. A lot of people will go, okay, I've got constipation. Let's go and address my large intestine. Let's go and take a probiotic or something else. And actually what we want to do is the large intestine is very far down our digestive system. We have the brain, we have the mouth, we have the stomach, we have the pancreas, we have the gallbladder, we have the small intestine. And so how are each of those functioning? So we want to make sure that we get our digestive system functioning from top down to make sure that we're not just putting plasters or band-aids on any symptoms that we're experiencing. So dysfunction further upstream can be due to dysfunction further downstream can be due to dysfunction further up. So instead of chasing symptoms, you want to address the system as a whole from top to bottom. So that's what we're going to do now, is walk through the digestive system from top to bottom and see how it works and give you lots of useful tips for each stage. So digestion starts in the brain. And we have two sides of what's called our autonomic nervous system. And this is the part of the nervous system that runs all of our involuntary mechanisms in our body. So the things that we don't think about, the things that subconsciously happen. We have two sides of this. So we have our sympathetic state, our fight or flight, which I'm probably most in right now whilst giving this presentation. And then we also have the parasympathetic system, which is our rest and digest state. So this is like the normal part of the nervous system which you want to be in, and it says at the bottom 80% of the time. This is when our body can repair. It's when our immune function can happen at its best. It's when we can digest our food. So when we are in the sympathetic state, this is our running away from a tiger state. So this is our survival state. So we are doing anything in this state to survive. So only crucial body functions are prioritized that are going to help us run away from that tiger, even if we're just running for the stress because we're about to miss a bus. And so when we're in that sympathetic state, things like digestion, immune function, etc., that reproductive function are not prioritized. And so things like, as I just said, they rely on us being in this parasympathetic state. And so if we're not in this parasympathetic state when we're actually stressed, this inhibits all of these processes and is obviously not ideal. So this can be, sources of stress. So you obviously want to make sure that overall in your life, you're going, okay, having a regular look at your life and going, oh, these particular things are stressful. And then I would recommend to look at them and go, are these things controllable or not controllable? And then obviously address the ones that are controllable. And I'm sure Robin, when she goes into her series of talks, will address stress and how to get around those things. So I'm not going to go too much into detail. But around the topic of nutrition, there are plenty of sources of stress that could be there, that could be putting a burden on our body all of the time. So inflammatory diets devoid of nutrients, because remember, our body needs nutrients to function. If we're on the blood sugar roller coaster, and as an extra note, sugar also suppresses the immune system. Environmental toxins, we'll dive into those shortly in next week's talk. Dehydration, an imbalance in the gut microbiome, and inflammation from chronic disease. And obviously, inflammation from chronic disease may be a function of some of the others, so you can't necessarily directly affect it, but it's just useful to know. And obviously, it can be a circular issue. So we could be eating an inflammatory diet that then affects our digestive system, that then affects our inflammation again. So it can just go round and round in circles. But there are things you can do to control how to control you being in a parasympathetic state when you eat your meals. So as a non-negotiable, I really try and make sure that I sit down and eat in a relaxed state. So when you if you're the one that's cooking your food, while you're cooking your food, smell your food, look at your food. This is all your brain working to identify that you're about to eat a meal. When you smell those foods, your body will start to produce saliva, gastric juices, and everything else to ready your body for digestion. Even if you haven't cooked food and you're just enjoying food, when it gets put down on the table in front of you, take a few moments to look at your food and just see what it's like. And then eat in a relaxed state, away from TV, out of the car, not walking down the street. Take a few deep breaths before you start your meal, and then eat your meals mindfully. It can make a massive, massive difference. So the next step is the mouth. So in the mouth, this is where we have the mechanical breakdown and chemical breakdown of food. And so we break down foods here before they're then swallowed and pass into the esophagus on the way to the stomach. So the teeth break down the food mechanically into small, easily digestible pieces. And the saliva produced by the salivary glands that contains enzymes starts breaking down the food, so carbohydrates in particular. The chewing movement with the tongue ensures that everything mixes together and that the saliva is mixed into the food. So saliva is electrolytes, enzymes, hormones, and it also has immune cells to help, as we talked about, kill anything that's coming in our food. And that's also why we have the gag reflex, because we often gag if there's something coming into us that we don't want to be there. It's a good reflex to get rid of the food. So a note for those with Sjogren's is this can affect the salivary glands and therefore affect the production of enzymes that are needed to start down the breakdown of food. And a dry mouth can also enable opportunistic bacteria to flourish. And so if you suffer with Sjogren's syndrome, disease, please pay extra attention to digestion in your mouth. And we'll talk about that now. So steps to support digestion: chew your food. So we say drink your solids. So you want to chew them so much that they're like a liquid. And again, if you have a smoothie, we still want you to chew your food in your mouth to make sure that you mix it with the saliva and the enzymes. Put your cutlery down between mouthfuls. Support your saliva production. You can make an electrolyte lemonade using lemon and maple syrup. And I'll send a recipe through when I send through some key information from this presentation to Charmaine. Coconut water, because it's got key electrolytes in it. I often dilute it with water, can be a really good accompaniment to a meal to help digest your food, like the electrolyte lemonade. Or you can just use lemon and water with a small pinch of salt that again contains the electrolytes and will just help help you digest your food. Also, we want to make sure, because saliva is mostly made of water, as our other gastric juices, that we are drinking enough water throughout the day, but away from meals, because if we have them with meals, it dilutes gastric juices. So the stomach. So the food travels down from the mouth, and once it leaves the mouth, it turns into a food mixture called the bolus, and then it goes into the stomach. And in the stomach, we have the production of hydrochloric acid, and this is aiming to lower the pH of the stomach to 1.5 to 3. And just to get a bit of an idea, the pH of lemon juice is 2. So this is very, very, very acidic. And this starts a chemical breakdown of proteins by activating the protein digesting enzyme called pepsin. It's also a key part of the immune system, because this acidity, if we have things that come in on our food, it kills them. And so therefore, having enough stomach acid is a very key part of a good immune system. And it also supports the absorption of minerals. So things like iron, zinc, calcium, and vitamin B12 are all cleaved from the foods that they come in on when they're in the stomach. And so if someone comes to me and their B12 levels are low, they've got low iron levels, one of the things I'm always thinking about is, do they have enough stomach acid? Mucus is produced by cells in the stomach that actually protect the lining from the acidity, so they're not damaged by it. And then there are neurons of the nervous system that in our parasympathetic state, they help your mechanical squeezing and churning of the food to help bathe everything in the gastric juices so it all breaks down. And then once the pH is low enough and all the food is mixed, what happens is the food will be then sent through the bottom of the stomach into the small intestine through a sphincter. So let's talk about stomach acid. So many of us actually suffer from what's called hypochlorhydria, which is low stomach acid. But many people think they actually have too much stomach acid, and actually research by someone called Dr. Jonathan Wright, who's written a book called Why is Stomach Acid Good for You, estimates that 90% of people suffer from hypochlorhydria. Common symptoms are aversions to protein, heartburn, indigestion, and feeling full in the morning. And when this happens, we can't absorb our nutrients as well. It affects function further south. So it affects function in the small intestine, the large intestine. Proteins will all remain undigested and they'll putrefy, so we absorb our proteins as well. And it again reduces effectiveness of the immune barrier, which you've talked about. So heartburn. So often people experience heartburn because they haven't produced enough stomach acid in the stomach. And so what happens is that there's an increase in the pressure in the stomach, because the bottom of the stomach doesn't want to release this mixture because it's not acidic enough, even though there is a bit of acid in there. So what often happens is that pressure builds up, and then the food mixture with the acid in it is driven up into our esophagus. Our esophagus is not designed to deal with acidic food. And it doesn't produce mucus that protects it from this acid. And so when the food is in the esophagus, it causes these symptoms of heartburn, which are really obviously not very pleasant. But often what happens is we treat this with medications like PPIs, and which unfortunately then will reduce the amount of acid in our gut. But this is not getting to the root cause, and then will potentially lead to increased likelihood of things like osteoporosis and other things in the future, because you're not absorbing your nutrients. But what we really want to do is really go, is this a symptom because you maybe don't have enough stomach acid? Common causes of low stomach acid are chronic stress, we've already talked about, medication, aging. So it's just a factor, one of these factors of aging. So you need to work on it more and more as you get older. A zinc deficiency, because hydrochloric acid production requires zinc. And we also need things like the chloride in hydrochloric acid. So that's things like salt. Eating too fast and in a stress state, as we've already talked about. So steps to support digestion. And this is really where I would always try and start to get an allied health provider to start working with you. And so you can support HCl production, and you can do this through lemon and apple cider vinegar and warm water at the start of meals. You can eat foods containing B vitamins and zinc. Oysters is a fabulous source of zinc, and that really helps make your stomach acid. So that can be really good if you feel like full in the mornings, the day after you eat your dinner, and other things. And you can do it by yourself and just work slowly to just see how it makes you feel. It is also often much needed to heal any of the mucous membranes that are in your gut after many periods of dysfunction. So often I would, with all my clients, what I'll do first of all is help you heal your lining of your stomach and just your gastrointestinal tract. So we want to, obviously, hydration and a mineral-rich diet we've talked about, but eat foods or use supplements that are healing to the mucous membranes. So examples are things that are slow cooked, are very easy to digest. And if you slow cook them with things like chicken broth, it adds that extra healing layer. So slow cooked stews. I make things like vegetable mashes, sweet potato, cauliflower. I just cook them in bone broth and literally blend them with some coconut oil or some butter or ghee in it. I then get something from a health food shop called Slippery Elm and add it into warm water to help heal your gut. Aloe vera can be really helpful, which you can get from a health food shop. Marshmallow root and licorice tea can also be really helpful for healing your mucous membranes. Just a caution about licorice is that licorice, and I'm not talking about the licorice bullets that are commonly available in Australia that are full of other ingredients, but it's like pure licorice. But obviously it's a herb and you've got to be very careful, but licorice is definitely contraindicated in anyone with high blood pressure. So please be careful. And this is why I think it's really good to work with a health practitioner. And healing the mucous membranes is also really essential in anyone who's taken any medication for heartburn or to reduce your stomach acid. So please also make sure you're doing this vital healing step. And this is can be vital for everyone. And then again, support digestion further north. So support digestion in the mouth and support digestion in your brain. And a reminder, as I just said, bioindividuality, we all have to listen to our body to understand what truly works for us. So then we move on to the pancreas and the gallbladder. So the food, as we said, moves then into the small intestine. And then these, what they're called accessory organs, come into play. Just because they're accessory organs, it doesn't mean they're not essential, because they're very essential. So what the pancreas does is the pancreas, it releases, when the acidic mixture comes in from the stomach, it releases what's called sodium bicarbonate, which is a bit like bicarbonate of soda. And this neutralizes this food mixture, and it neutralizes it so it doesn't damage the lining of the small intestine. It also releases pancreatic enzymes for the further breakdown of protein, carbohydrates, and fat. And also, just to note that these pancreatic enzymes only really work in a neutral pH. So if the sodium bicarbonate is not released, it will damage the enzymes. So the gallbladder produces bile that is, it releases bile that is produced from the liver, and it is released in the presence of fat. And so bile acts like a washing detergent it emulsifies the fats. You know, when you put washing up liquid in your washing, and when you're doing your dishes, and it breaks up all of the little fat globules, it does exactly that. It supports your fat, it breaks down your fat, so it then can be acted on by enzymes released by the pancreas. Bile also carries out toxins out of the body, and it's really what makes stool brown. So the pancreas, if the stomach doesn't reach high enough acidity, what will happen is when the mixture goes into the small intestine, the mixture is not acidic enough to trigger the pancreas to release the sodium bicarbonate. So what will then happen, say the pH only got down to 4, and it's supposed to be 1.5 to 3, it will go into the small intestine, but it won't release the sodium bicarbonate. So therefore, the pH will stay at 4 as it goes through the small intestine. That will burn kind of the lining of the small intestine because it's not protected by mucus. And it will also kill the digestive enzymes that is produced by the pancreas. So it will mean that foods are not broken down. So in our gut, we'll have a lovely mixture of carbohydrates fermenting, proteins putrefying, and fats acidifying. How nice. And what this is, this damages the lining of the small intestine that causes inflammation. It's also food for the kind of opportunistic or the bad bacteria that leads to an overgrowth of bacteria. And it affects the absorption of nutrients. And you may have a sign of, you may not release enough pancreatic enzymes or have something going wrong if you have undigested food in your stool, you have bloating or gas, you have fingernails that chip or break easily, you get constipation or diarrhea. Then on to the gallbladder. So bile can become very thick, or the liver may not produce it properly, resulting in inadequate bile flow. This means bile will not flow easily in relation to eating fats. So your fats will not be digested properly. And we've already talked about how we actually have an epidemic of fatty acid deficiency. And this can be, if you are getting lots of fats in your diet, but you're still get things like dry skin and other things, it can be because you're not digesting your fats, even though you're eating them. It also means toxins will not be carried out in the body by the bile, and it will also affect the liver and the lining of the intestines. So signs of dysfunction are if you've had a history of a low-fat diet, so that means that your gallbladder won't have been triggered to work, and so therefore the bile might have built up in your gallbladder over time. If you have stools that are clay color or float or are greasy or shiny, if you have a stomach that's upset by greasy foods, you have a history of motion sickness or morning sickness, dry skin or itchy feet, or dry skin on the bottom of your feet, if you get headaches over your eyes, if you get gallbladder attacks or pain. And it's also, you're more susceptible with the long-term use of medication and things, and alcohol and other things that put pressure on your liver because the bile is produced by your liver. Gluten. So non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which is a reaction to gluten, can also cause issues with your bile flow in your gallbladder, and vegetable oils can be really, really aggravating. So for those that have no gallbladder, what will happen here is that you won't have a gallbladder, but bile is still produced by your liver. So it will drop uncontrollably into your intestines without not in just any time of day. And bile is caustic, so this causes damage. And so we need to take extra care in this case to support the gut lining. You most likely need to supplement with bile salts, but again, find the support of a practitioner to help you. Because we still want to have fats in our diet, because fats are critical for health. If you have your gallbladder out, you may be advised to go on a low-fat diet, but what's that going to do to the rest of your body? Coconut oil can actually be digested without the emulsification by bile salts. So if you are struggling with your fat digestion, coconut oil can be a really good choice to use and add into your diet. So steps to support digestion at this point. So you can support enzyme production through eating certain foods. So certain foods contain enzymes. And so you can what you can do is once a week, you can make a batch of a mixture of some of these foods and keep them in your fridge and then have a couple of tablespoons with every meal. And then what you can do is change it up every few days, make a mixture of some things some days, and then make an extra mixture of another thing another day. So you can eat things like pineapple, papaya, mango, kiwi, banana, avocado, miso. Any sort of fermented foods are fabulous. And then things like raw food. So I'll often make something like I'll make a little salad with pineapple or celery or beetroot or things that will just get those, help act like pancreatic enzymes. You can then eat foods that support the liver and bile production. So beetroot, lemon, bitter greens and herbs, radishes, cooked cruciferous vegetables. And the reason I say cooked is non-cooked cruciferous vegetables, so things like broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts it can be slightly problematic if you don't cook them, so it's often a lot easier if you cook them. Include healthy fats in all meals because that triggers the production of bile. Remove gluten and processed oils. Then you can also do things like lifestyle related, so infrared saunas, dry brushing, Epsom salt baths. It will all support just general detoxification in your body. It'll support your liver health. It will in turn support your bile health. Again, support digestion further north to make sure everything further north is going right, because we learned about how important getting our stomach acid right is to support things like the pancreas. And finally, the small and the large intestine. So in the small intestine will mix the food mixture with all of these gastric juices that are released to support digestion, so we can break down every single bit of our food. And once food is broken down into the smallest piece, it will be absorbed through the gut lining. Food will then, anything that's not absorbed will then continue to pass through what's called the ileocecal valve and then go into the large intestine. If you put your hand on your hip and then also on your belly button, and you go halfway on your right-hand side, and you go halfway between that is where your ileocecal valve is. So that's the valve that joins your small and your large intestine together. Often people experience pain in this halfway point, so between your right hip and your belly button. They'll experience a lot of pain here, and that's around what's called the ileocecal valve, which bacteria can love to hang out here. So bile that is produced by the gallbladder, which you just said, will help cause peristalsis, so movement of the waste through the large intestine. And then water is reabsorbed, and then waste is excreted as stool. And this includes like fat-soluble toxins that's carried out in bile. A quick note on the appendix, which is another accessory organ. So this is near the ileocecal valve. And people think the appendix is not very useful, but it actually is. It helps colonize the large intestine with good bacteria. So especially after you, say, take antibiotics, your bacteria a lot of them will be reduced or wiped out. But the appendix will have that nursery of bacteria that can then come in and repopulate your gut. And also here, there is a high concentration of the gut immune system. So just to talk a little bit about this gut barrier. So the lining of the small intestine it's called the small intestine, but actually it has such a large surface area. And it's got such a large surface area. So what happens is the large intestine obviously folds around a lot. And then, as you can see on this diagram on the right-hand side, it's got what's called a brush border. And so the actual lining of each cell kind of goes up and down, up and down, up and down. And that's to increase the surface area for absorption of nutrients. So there is this lining here. And as you can see from this diagram, it is only one cell thick. And so the space between your inside of your intestines and your blood is only one cell. And that's again to increase absorption. And this membrane should be what we call semi-permeable. So it allows the absorption of fully digested nutrients, but it also prevents the passage of other contents from inside our gut across the membrane and into the body. So if we look at the diagram on the right-hand side, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but on this left-hand side of this diagram, rather, you see here all of the cells are nicely packed together. And in this situation, it will allow the food and things to go through the cells that are supposed to, and it will stop things and keep them in the intestines for things that we don't want in there. On the right-hand side, if our gut becomes damaged, you'll see that what happens is that the distance between the cells can increase, and so things can flow between them, or the cells can actually break in half, and things that we don't want can just flow directly into the bloodstream. And so because we are absorbing things from our external environment here, this is why we have such a large part of our immune system that sits in our gut. And so the immune system will sit basically between the lining of the intestines and the bloodstream. And what it's doing, it's checking everything that comes in to go, is this safe? Is this not safe? Is this safe? Is this not safe? And obviously it will have, if our gut is tightly together and it's functioning well, the immune system will have kind of a normal amount of work to do. But if we have leaky gut, things will be flying at the immune system left, right, and center, causing huge amounts of stress. The immune system may miss things, and the immune system may be reacting all the time, and this will drive inflammation. This is, as we talked about, a trigger for autoimmunity and lots of other things. Also in this wall is the enteric nervous system, so the nervous system of our gut, and also there's 100 trillion bacteria that exist in mostly our large intestine, but all around here that will interact with our immune system and everything else. So as I've said, when this is damaged, we have what's called increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut. And so incompletely digested proteins can pass through, bacteria or bacterial fragments, infectious organisms, and waste products. As I said before, this drives inflammation. It can cause general symptoms, so fatigue, difficulty concentrating, puffiness. It causes just general dysfunction in the immune system, and it also causes nutrient deficiency because we're not really absorbing what we need to. As I said before, increased permeability has been present in every single immune disease in which it's been tested. So, as I said, we have 100 trillion bacteria that exist in our gut, and 100 different bacteria make up 99% of this population. It has a close relationship with our immune system that is in our gut lining, and we need to make sure we have the right balance of the bacteria and diversity of the bacteria in the right places. If not, this is when we're going to get dysfunction. So our bacteria is extremely important, and I've listed the reasons here. So our bacteria make vitamins. It feeds the cells of our colon. It also supports us with energy production. It has a close relationship and helps with our immune system that's in our gut lining, as I've already talked about. It helps regulate gene expression. It maintains the integrity of our intestinal lining. And it can also communicate through our body with the gut-brain axis that we've talked about, and also help the production of neurochemicals, so GABA, serotonin, and other things that really support our brain and mental health. So what impacts our microbiome? So things like diet, digestive function, nutritional deficiencies, vaginal birth versus C-section and breastfeeding, chemicals from our food and our environment, antibiotics. Some people say that your microbiome will never recover from taking antibiotics, stress, and your genetics. And this point on the right is quite interesting. So not everyone has the same natural flora in our gut. Those in more industrialized countries have fewer species in their gut than those in less industrialized countries. And it also shows that people that spend lots of time in nature can also improve their microbiome. So we can have in our gut, there are also what's called autoimmune triggers. So there are certain bacteria in the gut that are associated with certain autoimmune conditions. And I don't mean that these cause it. They actually don't know enough about it. It's an association at this stage. So you can actually test the makeup of your gut and also how well you digest your food through doing something called a GI map stool test, which I do in my clinic and people do all over the world. And so the purpose of this is to really look at the makeup of your microbiome to see if there's things in there that indicate digestive dysfunction, that indicate inflammation, and then you can take the appropriate rectifying steps. These bacteria are not necessarily of cause for concern by themselves, but we want to look at the gut as a whole to see what's in there and then obviously make the necessary changes using maybe antimicrobial herbal formulas, probiotics, and then obviously a diet conducive to a healthy microbiome. So I've covered most of this already, but reasons for increased intestinal permeability: poor diet, nutritional deficiencies, digestive dysfunction, which is why I went into so much detail earlier, because we want to make sure that by the time the food gets to the intestines where it's absorbed, it's broken down appropriately and we're not driving dysfunction. Dysbiosis, so an imbalance in the bacteria, gluten, which I'll touch upon in a second, food intolerances, medications, inflammation, stress, lack of sleep, and chemicals in our environment, all of which we have covered in Dragon Talks mostly throughout. And there's obviously things like medications and things which we can't control. So I'm not telling you to take your medications away, but I'm saying let's look at other things. So supporting gut function is fundamental for those with an autoimmune condition. And a few interesting facts. So medications used to treat autoimmune conditions, namely methotrexate and sulfasalazine, help make beneficial shifts to the microbiome. So the question to me is, maybe one of the reasons why they're working is because of these beneficial shifts that they're making. Then also transplanting microbiomes in mice with microbiomes from SLE, so mice with lupus, led to an increase in the antibodies related to lupus and promoted an immune response. And it also can cause the upregulation of certain genes. So it just shows how important the microbiome is. Also, for those of you with rheumatoid arthritis, it's a reminder of you cannot forget how important oral health is, because many of the bacteria that are autoimmune triggers for this particular condition can also thrive in the mouth. So please make sure you get regular dental checkups, and that really applies to everyone. So just a quick note on gluten. So many people will react to gluten, but they actually don't realize, and I think I've already shared my story earlier on today. And so gluten is known to damage our gut lining. So I talked about those cells in our small intestines being wedded together really, 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 really tightly. What gluten does is it actually, in a very simple form, it actually encourages the gut lining to be pulled apart because it affects what's called the tight junctions. And so gluten can be everywhere. It's obviously in our bread and our pasta. It can be soy sauce. It can be in certain grains. It can also be hidden in lots of processed foods. Consider your intake of gluten. Like, how much do you have? Like, many societies before may have eaten gluten, but it was in a very different form, but they probably didn't eat it all of the time. All disease begins in the gut, says Hippocrates, and how relevant is that? So other than assessing the signs and symptoms above that we've talked about through and through, like, do you have any of these symptoms? Do you get bloat, reflux, bloating, burping, gas, or other digestive symptoms? Is your transit time, so is the time between when you eat and when you poo between 12 or 24 hours? If not, that's something to consider. What you can do is do something called a sesame seed challenge or a beetroot challenge, where you eat a whole lot of sesame seeds or beetroot in one go, and then you wait to see how long it passes out the other side. And then you can get an idea of your transit time. So it's like maybe 2 or 3 tablespoons of sesame seeds or a large amount of beetroot, and then don't touch it again until it comes out the other side. Do you have a bowel movement between 1 and 3 times a day? And also, what does your stool look like? This is what's called the Bristol stool chart. So ideally, we want to have something between 3 and 4. And if it's something other than 3 and 4, this is an indication that we really want to do some work on our digestion. And as I said, digestion is a north to south process. So let's start at the top and then work our way down to make sure everything is in order. So how to support the gut? So eat a whole foods diet and making sure that we properly prepare our grains and legumes and nuts and seeds, that by soaking them. Support digestion. And then we can add, once we've done these two things, we can then add gut-loving superfoods. So things like broth or slow-cooked meats help support our gut lining and repair the gut. Fermented foods helps repopulate our gut. Then we can add a variety of non-starchy vegetables like that as a source of fiber or a prebiotic and they're nutrient dense. Sorry, hang on, I'm going to mute myself for 1 second. And then we talked about gluten, support the gut lining, and then also reducing our toxic exposure that we'll get into next week, because this can act as an antibiotic in our gut. Again, these 3 reminders that we've already talked about can be really, really, really important too. And again, focus on that sheet that I've already passed out called Foods to Enjoy and Foods to Avoid that you've already have somewhere in your emails from Charmaine. So maybe go back and have a look. Sometimes though, and just I'll quickly touch upon this, the foods you eat may have an amazing impact, but there also may be symptoms that are unresolved. And this is when you may want to look into food sensitivities. So this is when there are things that may be quote unquote good, but they're still affecting your gut, even though you've worked on digestion. Things like gluten, dairy, corn and soy are the most problematic things that are going to really affect your gut lining. So looking at those first of all, and I'd actually encourage lots of people to just see if you can eliminate these for a month or so and then bring them back in and see how you feel. But you can also develop food sensitivities to other more innocent foods like broccoli, garlic and onion. So if you have this, take the steps to work on digestion, but then otherwise you can also look into food sensitivity testing to see if there's anything additional that you're reacting to. You can also do something called an elimination diet. So this is when, and this is the gold standard really for identifying food sensitivities. And this is because this is when you take out something fully out of your diet for a period of time and then you bring it back in. So you take something out for 14 days, for example, and this can be longer. Whilst eating a nutrient-dense whole food diet, you do that for 14 days. And as I said, people commonly have sensitivities to things like gluten, dairy, corn, and soy. So take all of these things out. Then after 14 days, you'll reintroduce these foods one by one. So you'll reintroduce one food by eating lots of food on this day. So say, for example, you wanted to test gluten, you eat bread, say good quality bread 3 times on one day. You then avoid that food for a further 2 days and don't introduce anything else new to what you've been doing for the last 2 weeks. And then you note whether you have any digestive symptoms or other things that arise. And you then repeat this with other foods, but only one at a time. So these are possible food reactions. So digestive reactions, cravings, energy and mood, skin issues, aches and pains, sleep and other. So it just shows you that digestion goes far beyond just the gut. So how are you all going to prioritize your digestion and your gut health? Remember, digestion is a north to south process. And these are my top tips. So eat a whole food diet, eat in a relaxed state and chew your food, limit water around meals and support digestion with those drinks that we've talked about if needed. Take specific, can't speak, actions for you to support digestion. Eat gut-loving superfoods, address stresses in your life, and seek support from a practitioner.